Hi, my name is Jackson McLellan. I'm on faculty here at the Center for Musical Arts, and I'm here to talk to you about the season finale of the 2025 Colorado Music Festival, where Peter Ungen is going to lead the orchestra in a performance of Mahler's Ninth Symphony. To understand this gigantic piece, Mahler's Ninth Symphony, it really helps to think about Mahler as a person and the world that he was growing up in. So he was born in 1860 in a town called Iglau, which then part of the Austrian Empire, today part of the Czech Republic. And the world that he was born into is this Germanic classical world that really starts with the Bach family and has an incredible continuity between generations. So from the Bach family, J.S. Bach and his sons, we have this never-ending stream of great composers like Haydn, Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, Weber, Wagner, Berlioz, Mendelssohn, Bruckner. And in many cases, these people are literally teaching the next generation. Haydn literally taught Beethoven in a home studio. So we have this continuity that you don't see as prevalent in other parts of the classical music world, where there is a steady tradition all the way through. That's what Mahler is being born into. He's an incredibly musically precocious child, becomes a great pianist at a very young age, then goes to school and studies conducting and harmony and theory and composition with some of the great conductors of his day and composers of his day like Anton Bruckner. So this all leads to Mahler wondering, what's my role in this? What do I do in the next step? And historically, what's happened is things have gotten bigger and more experimental and more expressive. So from the era of Haydn, you have an orchestra of maybe 20 people. For Beethoven's First Symphony, he's writing for about 40. By the time Brahms is around, more like 80. More instruments are being added to the orchestra. So Haydn is writing for a brass section of just horns and trumpets, just a couple of each. Beethoven adds in trombones. Brahms adds in a tuba, just keeps expanding. And the length of piece gets longer and longer. So Haydn's First Symphony is only 13 minutes long, shorter than most symphonic movements these days. By the time Beethoven is writing his most famous piece, the Fifth Symphony, that's about 30 minutes long. Brahms' Second Symphony clocks in more like 45 minutes. So you have this theme of expansion, going and going and going. Mahler needs to figure out what he is going to do in that lineage, because he's a conductor who is studying these pieces intensely. He's playing the music of Weber and of Mozart and of Wagner and of Bruckner. He's really exposed to these German masters, and he's trying to figure out what his place in that world is. And his answer is basically expand everything as much as it possibly can. So his orchestra becomes massive. His instrumentation becomes what earlier generations would think is grotesque. He starts adding huge brass sections and gigantic choirs and vocal soloists, all this stuff to just make it bigger. And the symphony gets longer. This symphony, Mahler's Ninth, clocks in at over an hour in most performances. It is a huge work. The ethos that Mahler was cultivating was this idea that he expressed in a letter to his colleague John Sibelius. And he said, "The symphony must be like the world. It must embrace everything." So he had this idea of pulling anything he possibly could and putting it into his symphonies. So some of the influences you hear in there, birdsong, Jewish folk music, Austrian folk music, military marches, church music from the Catholic and Lutheran traditions, earlier composers' work, and even Mahler's own early work turn into themes for his symphonies. And the amount of variety, musical variety in the Ninth Symphony is just astounding. He manages to, as he put it, embrace everything, contain the world. In this symphony, Mahler's Ninth, it keeps a really traditional form, but it inverts and distorts that form in really interesting ways. So all the movements that you expect from a Haydn symphony are present, but in very different forms than you'd be used to hearing as a concert goer in 1912 when this was written, or today. The first movement of the symphony is massive and particularly celebrated. Alban said it was the greatest movement anyone had ever composed. It's in what's called a sonata allegro form. In the classical era, this means moving through key signatures and taking a theme, developing it, then revisiting that theme in a cycle. Mahler does this, but in a really different way. Instead of the allegro that we'd expect from Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, he makes this slow, andante, really gentle and flowing, completely different tempo than we're used to hearing at the start of a symphony. And instead of going between key signatures and a harmonic progression, we hear more of a mood progression. There's certainly harmony changes. I mean, it changes so fast, it's difficult to keep up with. There's harmonic changes constantly. But the main focus is the mood. And I really hear three moods happening in this first movement. So the first one is the very beginning in what some people call the heartbeat. That's the very first thing that the audience hears. And Mahler had a chronic and terminal heart condition that affected his heartbeat. And so a lot of scholars have thought maybe this is an expression of his literal heart, his cardiac health. That is the stillness that we open the movement in, this gentle, quiet, minimal character. Then we get little glimmers of a melody. First time we hear it is in the horns, this beautiful soaring melody. We have a lot of space, we have a lot of openness. It's a really beautiful way to begin the symphony. As that stillness starts to build and build into different melodies, we get the main melody, if you can call it that, of a Mahler symphony. It's tough to say a main melody because he puts dozens in every movement. It's so harmonically and melodically rich, it's difficult to pick out just one. But I think this is probably our main melody. There's this constant reaching upwards. Everything is moving up and moving up and moving up. And that's a theme throughout this entire symphony, is this upward reach. The third movement is chaos. As everything builds, you start getting more and more simultaneous melodies, sometimes in different keys, and we start getting rhythmic interest that makes it really difficult to hear what's happening in any given instrument. It becomes this wash of sound. After that big wash of sound, it drops out completely, and we go back to that still, gentle character. The entire movement moves through these stages: stillness, soaring melodies, chaos, stillness. This almost life cycle feeling that gives it just an amazing sense of motion. The second movement, in traditional structure, we'd expect a slow movement, andante, adagio, something slow and pretty and simpler than the previous movements. Instead, Mahler makes this a dance movement. This is his version of a minuet, but updated for the turn of the 20th century. So this is subtitled Etwas tapisch und sehr derb, somewhat tapisch, awkward, clumsy, drunk, gawky, und sehr derb, and very rough, very coarse, very unrefined. This is beer hall music. This is drinking songs and big festival dances in the Austrian Alps. This is very coarse, rough folk music. The melody that starts that out is this almost comically simple little line in the bassoons, highlighting that absolute simplicity. Then we get this jolly drinking song melody. Mahler is an absolute maximalist. He can't be satisfied with just one theme. So he actually puts in multiple dance themes that intersperse with each other. Here's a sampling of a few more of those. Kind of off-kilter, maybe a little sarcastic. And this bold statement that we get from the low brass. When you have these melodies overlaid with each other, you can interpret them in different ways. So one way that I picture this is maybe a big festival, a summertime festival in the Alps, where different bands are playing simultaneously and someone wanders in between them. Or maybe this is an old man, like Gustav Mahler, thinking about his youth and running through his glory days, all his crazy parties and bacchanals of his youth, and thinking about the different settings. We don't know. That's the beauty of Mahler, is that it's very open-ended, and you can add your own interpretation. But for me, I like the idea of a variety of beer hall acts, all cycling through someone's memory. Third movement is a rondo, which is what we'd normally expect in the fourth movement of a classical symphony, so another inversion of what we're expecting. A rondo means that the same theme comes back over and over and over and over again. And that certainly happens in Mahler's version, but in a very unique way. We get the Bach treatment. It is fugue music, where the theme gets treated in many, many different transformations. And it begins in different places across different instruments, different tempos, different ranges. This is what it would sound like if Bach lived 250 years and was writing music throughout the 20th century. It is an extension of everything that Bach did, but in a very modern context. And even the theme that would normally be very tonal and easy to listen to is very bizarre. That's Mahler's theme for the fugue, and it reappears hundreds of times over this very intense, emotionally fraught movement. The finale is where we expect happy, triumphant, fast music, and Mahler completely upends that and gives us this very beautiful, but very dark and very slow finale. The tempo is about 30 beats a minute, meaning that each beat takes about 2 seconds, a quarter of the time that we expect from a symphony finale. We get that same feeling of reaching upwards that we've had through the symphony, where things just constantly are moving up and up throughout the movement to drop back down and then move up and up. The melody might sound familiar. I'll play the melody that's first introduced by the violins in the very beginning of the movement. A lot of critics have heard the Christian hymn, "Abide with Me," in this melody. You can hear the similarities. There's Mahler, here's "Abide with Me." At this point, Mahler is nearing his death, whether he knows it or not, and there's good evidence that he really knew that he was close to his death. He had these chronic heart conditions that were making him weaker and weaker, and I think he understood that this was his last symphony or close to it. He was a very superstitious man. He believed in what was called the curse of the ninth, this idea that a classical composer can write 9 symphonies and then they die. It's what happened with Beethoven and Schubert and Bruckner, and Mahler really believed it. He thought that once he wrote his 9th symphony, he would die. And there is a sense of farewell in this symphony. There's a sense of goodbye, of trying to find peace, of wrestling with emotions and recollections of your life that really lend a lot of credence to this idea that this is his farewell. He does start a 10th symphony, and it pushes the boundaries even further. It's difficult to analyze in a tonal lens because it's so strangely harmonically written. It's so bizarre. But he only completes one movement of that symphony. Symphony 10 is one movement, and then he dies. So that curse that he was so afraid of ended up being true for him. And a lot of people do see the 9th Symphony as his farewell letter to the world, to himself, to his family, to music. One thing I like about Gustav Mahler is that he writes these big, broad statements in his music, these gigantic, long meditations. And that's the way I prefer to listen to his music. Instead of trying to pick out every little theme and follow it in a formal structure, I treat it as a meditation, which is how I think he thought about a lot of his music, a place to reflect on big questions. So I encourage you, when you listen to this on August 3rd at the Chautauqua Auditorium, use it as a spot to meditate. Use it as a time to think about big themes in your life. And the beauty of Mahler is whatever you're feeling, he'll find a way to heighten it with this beautiful music. Thank you so much for listening. My name's Jackson McLellan, and I hope to see you at this concert, August 3rd, Chautauqua Auditorium. Thanks.